Chapter 3. David stood at the edge of the large, unkempt front yard that stretched partially down the hill where the mansion stood and tried to let this situation sink in. He was really here, standing on the grounds of Riverview House. After all these years of planning, the countless 16-hour days, 6-day work weeks, saving every penny he could put his hands on, he was finally here. In many ways, it still seemed like a dream to him. The nicks and bruises from the hard work of the past few days were sore enough, however, to remind him that all of this was actually real. He looked at the old house, whose bare bones showed in sharp contrast with the endless blue early morning sky. The front of the house was bathed in sunshine from the first rays of light to touch home this morning, casting long and sharp shadows across the landscape. David was surprised that he really didn't have any deep feelings at all towards the house. Certainly, it was an impressive structure. The house was built during the 1840s by a wealthy steamship owner, and was placed on one of the highest hills along the Mississippi. The 3-story mansion was pre-Victorian in design, with a large porch surrounding the entire structure. The chimneys from the structure's 14 fireplaces spotted what was once a roofline. The grey stone exterior of the house were the load-bearing walls, and they were nearly 3 feet thick at the house's lowest level. Large doors opened out onto balconies on the 2nd and 3rd floors, and a widow's walk graced the roof. Not that anyone, David thought with a sigh, would even consider trying to walk on the decaying roofline or balconies. Most of the exterior woodwork was going to have to be repaired at best, and replaced at worst. The porch area was still basically sound, which was a big help, but most of the upper house woodwork would have to be replaced. Well, he thought to himself, you knew that coming in. You also knew about the plumbing, heating and electrical systems. He had managed to save $300,000 over the last 10 years doing this renovation project, and it looked like he was going to have to spend every cent of it, perhaps even more. While another might have balked at the thought of spending virtually every cent that he had managed to save over a very financially successful 10 years to renovate a house they had no intention of living in or selling, David Miller did not give the matter a second thought. He was a man who had a promise to keep. Jessica tightened the strap on her helmet and swung her long, shapely leg over the top tube of her bicycle and checked for any traffic stirring at such an early hour. She clipped the cleats of her special cycling shoes into pedals that were designed to match, and she headed west towards the hill. She picked up speed, easily shifting gears and settling into a strong, confident cadence. The coolness of the morning breeze nipped at her skin, and she could feel her nipples becoming firm and erect. Slowing at a 4-way stop sign, she saw no traffic and blew right on through the intersection. Jessica knew that she should come to a complete stop at every sign, but the restless part of her always won over her sensible side if there were no cars around. She turned down 12th Street and made a right onto College. Before her was what the local cyclists referred to as the Hill of Death. The hill was in no way dangerous. There was virtually no traffic on the road that climbed towards Riverview House. She checked one last time for traffic, shifted up, and mashed down on the pedals. Accelerating quickly, she hit the bottom of the hill at 27 miles an hour. She downshifted though her gears quickly, and soon was girding up the desperately steep grade in granny gear, the easiest gear that the bicycle had. 3 minutes of brutal climbing brought her, breathless and flushed, into view of the mansion and its owner. David turned to see what was making all the noise from down the hill, and he watched the helmeted figure of a woman on an expensive racing road bicycle climb into view up the hill. David, himself an avid cyclist, was shocked to see somebody even trying such a steep grade on a racing-style bicycle, and he was even more surprised when the panting figure got close enough for him to see who it was. Cycling clothing is not the type of attire worn by people who are ashamed of their bodies, and the strong, healthy, voluptuous form in this set of skin-tight shorts and jersey certainly had no reason to be shy. She was, indeed, stunning. David used every ounce of self-control that he could muster to keep his eyes focused on her face, fighting back every male urge within him to let them wander downward. "Good morning," reporter Jessica Thomas of the Riverton Sentinel. David said in what he hoped was a friendly and playful voice. "Hi, HFFFF. Mr. Something, HFFFF. Or other." Jessica barely managed to gasp. She leaned down over her bars, rather embarrassed at being so winded from just one trip up the hill. "Phew," she continued, "I am getting out of shape, Haven't had time to get in much riding lately. I haven't either, David replied, pointing his thumb back over his shoulder at the mansion looming in the brightening morning sky. You ride? Jessica asked, instantly regretting that her comment sounded so surprised. Yes, I ride, David replied in a matter-of-fact fashion. I used to ride more than I do now, but I still ride when I can. I have my bike with me. Perhaps you can show me some good roads around here. Jessica smiled. I would like that. We have several great roads, good hills, and decent pavement, not much traffic. I try to ride every morning. As she spoke, she spent some time casually drinking in David's long, thin features. Yes, she thought. I wonder why I didn't notice it before. He looks like a cyclist. A darn sexy one at that. You have to promise not to leave me behind, David said, pointing to her bicycle. Some of us don't have a rich reporter's job. We can't afford titanium bikes like that one. The comment struck an odd chord with Jessica. While her bicycle certainly was a nice one, anybody who could afford to both purchase and renovate an entire mansion could certainly buy any bicycle he wanted. She patted the handlebars of her Pride and Joy, wiping off a cobweb that had drifted by from somewhere in the early morning breeze. She's a beauty, but I didn't buy it on my, what did you call it, rich reporter's salary, she said in a wispy, almost hushed voice. It was a gift. Well, David replied, somebody must like you very much to give you a gift like that. It was a gift from my very favorite man in the world, Jessica said with a soft smile, running her hand across the brake lever. She remembered the day she got her bike as clearly as if it were yesterday. Her old bike was in the shop for the millionth time, and would cost as much to fix as to replace it. She had decided that it was time that she simply had to replace her old bicycle with an inexpensive new one. She told a 16-year-old Philip of her plans, and he had asked her if he could go help her pick one out. Surprised, she agreed and they piled into their economy car for the short trip across town. When they entered the shop, she was surprised to see a titanium racing bicycle with all the top components on it sitting in the window. The local shop stocked comfort and mountain bikes normally, not expensive road bicycles. She was more surprised to see a large sold Philip Thomas tag on it. Jessica turned to Philip and started to protest, but stopped short when she saw the look in his eyes. He placed a finger across her lips and said softly, "You have been there for me every day, you have sacrificed everything for me. I earned this money at the supermarket myself, and this is what I am spending it on. You are going to respect my wishes on this, and this discussion is over. Now go get yourself some shoes that fit those pedals, and go ride your new bike." Jessica's eyes still got misty every time she remembered that day. David saw the fondness in her eyes, and said nothing. Yeah, lawyers can throw money around with the best of them, he thought. So what brings you up such a steep hill on a Thursday morning? He asked. Other than the obvious, Jessica said while pointing to her bicycle. I have to admit I was curious. Curious? Curious about what, exactly? I was curious why an apparently successful big city architect is here in our little corner of heaven renovating that big old house, she said, pointing at the mansion. I know you won't be surprised that I did a little checking around on you, Mr. Something Garotha. David considered for a moment. Well, if I am going to be Mr. Something Garotha, we are going to have to come up with an appropriate name for you. How does Miss Nosy-Pants sound to you? Jessica laughed, and flashed David a glowing smile. Well, that's the nicest thing anybody has called me in a long time. I like it. I am Miss Nosy-Pants. It fits. David felt more than a twinge inside at the sight of this lovely woman's delightful smile. She was so very full of life, she was so much like. No, he had best not go there. Jessica noticed the cloud that seemed to come over David's face, and stopped short, wondering what she had said that might have offended him. Nothing popped out at her. Perhaps a change of subject would be best. I am curious about what you are going to do with the house, she said in a pleasant but neutral voice. As he raised his eyebrows and readied a response, she quickly continued, I know you say it's private business, and I am not just trying to live up to my new name. I have always loved this house, and I was friends with the previous owner, Mrs. Taggett. I am not very good at fixing things, but when she was alive I tried to help her out the best that I could. Jessica said, dismounting her bike. When I was little, my sister Susan and I used to come up here and play that we owned this house. Mrs. Taggett would have us over for tea, and she would tell us grand stories about how this house used to be the center of society for the entire county. When she talked about those parties, it was almost like we were there. Jessica continued. The men coming in their tuxedos, the women in their fine dresses. There would be dancing in the ballroom, and a grand feast downstairs. We would sit for hours as Mrs. Taggett talked about all of the famous people that visited, and Susan and I promised ourselves that one day we would own this house and fix it up to be just like it was back then. Jessica gave a short, quiet laugh. Well, Mr. Something Garotha, that's never going to happen. Susan isn't with us anymore and I couldn't afford to pay the light bill on this place, let alone own it. Still, the old house is a part of me. She looked deeply into David's handsome brown eyes, and an edge of hardness crept into her voice. I want to know what you are doing here. I want to know what your plans are for the house. Not for publication, not for Ms. Nosypants. I want to know for me. David started deeply into her hard, intense hazel eyes and saw a light there that he hadn't seen in years. I am renovating this house, restoring it to what it was like before the turn of the last century. He said, I am going to make it something you and your sister Susan would be proud of. Then, shocking himself as much as Jessica, he added, and I want you to help me make it look like the house of your dreams.